Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about Reconstruction. And Reconstruction simply means to rebuild. So after the Civil War, uh, which is General Lee, he surrendered at Appomattox. That's when the war ended. And the country was very divided. People weren't happy. A lot of people in the South were angry that they lost. People in the North wanted to punish the South. So what we're going to talk about is leaders tried to decide the best way to about getting over the Civil War. Some people wanted to punish the Confederacy, which the Confederacy was the South. Some people wanted to forgive the Confederacy. Other people wanted to ensure that African Americans had more rights. Remember, African Americans in the South used to be slaves. So they couldn't vote, they weren't allowed to have property, they couldn't have houses, they couldn't marry. So some people wanted to make sure that they were able to vote, that they can marry, that they can get jobs, they can buy a house, things like that. And another important thing to remember is the Confederacy, which once again is the South, was very affected negatively by the Civil War, while the North made a lot of money and was affected positively. And what we mean by that is the South was not doing well. They had their farms destroyed. The money that the Confederate had became worthless. Nobody wanted it, so you couldn't buy anything with the money you had. And there was the loss of slave labor because the South, the Confederacy, had slaves, which was free labor. So they made a lot of money off that, but they weren't able to do that anymore. And the southern cities were destroyed. Where in the North, it was the opposite. They started to make a lot of money. The North did very well. And during the Civil War, almost all of the fighting was in the South. There really wasn't any fighting in the North. And this is a picture of what the South kind of looked like. You can see the buildings are destroyed. But after the war, key leaders proposed competing Reconstruction, which once again means rebuilding plans, as each had different objectives on the path to restoring the nation's identity. So one plan was called the 10% plan. This was Abraham Lincoln's plan. And led by Abraham Lincoln, who wanted to quickly restore the legitimate southern state governments. So essentially, he wanted to put the old leaders before the war back in charge. So if you were a government before the Civil War, he wanted you to be the governor again. He wanted to put the same senators, the same congressmen, all that stuff. And he believed that the Confederate governments were illegitimate and the states never really left the Union. So to him, he didn't think they left the Union because it wasn't real. Illegitimate means not real. So he didn't think the governments were real. And he proposed that once 10% of the registered voters in a state pledged loyalty to the U.S., then the state government will return to power. So let's say Alabama is a state or Virginia is a state. Once 10% of the voters there said that they'll join the U.S. again, they'll do a pledge, then they could they'll enter the United States again. And the 10% plan also, Lincoln wanted to pardon, which means to forgive, all of the Confederate leaders if they pledged an allegiance to the United States. So if you were a general or an officer for the Confederacy and you pledge allegiance to the United States, you would be forgiven. You would not have to go to jail or anything like that. That's what a pardon means. You won't have to go to jail. And the 10% plan also said that all state constitutions, which those are laws, had to banish slavery. Banish means to get rid of, so no more slavery. However, the 10% plan did not offer protection to freed African Americans, and African Americans would not be able to vote under this 10% plan. However, Lincoln was assassinated, which means killed, just days after Lee's surrender at Appomattox. So Appomattox is where Lee, the Confederate general, surrendered. It's where the Confederacy says they lose the war, they don't want to fight anymore. And radical Republicans used Lincoln's assassination to influence Reconstruction and made more punitive, harsh towards the former Confederate states. So we're going to learn more about the radical Republicans later. But yeah, President Lincoln, he was shot and killed while watching a a movie, actually, not a movie, but a play in D.C. This guy named John Wilkes Booth walks up behind him and shot Lincoln in the head. And yeah, well, the reason why Wilkes Booth shot him, he was a former Confederate. He wanted slavery, so he wasn't happy that Lincoln got rid of it. So he shot and killed him. After Lincoln is killed, his successor as president is Andrew Johnson. So this is the president after Lincoln's killed. And he adopted Lincoln's Reconstruction plan. And he also offers to pardon most high-ranking military and political Confederate leaders who requested them. So he was going to pardon people as well, but he was going to pardon most. Lincoln wanted to pardon all. Johnson was going to pardon most. He also said states had to get rid of slavery. However, what was different with him is he said the Confederacy had to pay back the cost of war, so the debt. So all the money that the North owed or different places, the Confederacy had to pay that money back. Essentially, he was saying you had to pay for the war. And under this, African Americans would still not be able to vote. And congressional leaders are angry at the South's enactment of black codes. That's laws that were unfair to African Americans. And they challenged Johnson's authority in leading Reconstruction. So some people didn't like Johnson's plan because he wasn't really helping black people out, even though they were no longer going to be slaves. The South started creating things called black codes that said you can't own property, you can't vote. So blacks didn't have a lot of rights in the South. So some people didn't like Johnson because he wasn't protecting black people enough. And high-ranking former Confederate leaders were elected to Congress, and they also challenged Johnson's Reconstruction plan. So there was people who used to be in the Confederacy that rejoined the United States, and they got elected to Congress, and they challenged Johnson's Reconstruction plans. The third plan we're going to learn about is the Radical Republicans plan, and they believe that secessionists, which were the Confederates, because secession means to leave, and the Confederates tried to leave the United States. They believe they should not be allowed back into the Union immediately, but put them under military occupation. And they wanted to punish the South, essentially. They did not want to be friends with them. They wanted to punish them, make them pay for leaving the United States, make them pay for the fighting that they had. So they said, you know what, we don't want you to join the United States right away. Maybe later you can. And the Radical Republicans believed in guaranteeing voting and other civil rights to African Americans. So essentially, they wanted African Americans to be treated equally. And they clashed with Andrew Johnson over civil rights and impeached him, but were unable to remove him from office. And impeach is where you try to remove the president. So they tried to remove him as president. By him, we mean Andrew Johnson as president, but weren't able to. And they also did not want Confederate leaders to return to power. So to them, they said if you were ever in the Confederacy as a leader, you can't run for office. And they wanted to make Republicans a powerful party in the South. And the Radical Republicans, they wanted the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment added to the Constitution in order to establish legal rights of African Americans. And the Constitution those are the laws of the country. So they're very important because every single state has to follow these laws. And the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. So slavery is illegal in the United States. Doesn't matter if you're in California. Doesn't matter if you're in Idaho, Alabama, Virginia, New York. You can't have slaves. 14th Amendment, which can possibly affect you guys one day. It's a very important one. It says all people born in the USA are United States citizens. So this one really protected a lot of African Americans because they were slaves. Maybe they were brought here from Africa, but their children were born in the United States. So if you're born in the United States, it doesn't matter where your parents are from. You are a United States citizen if your parents are from the United States. So if one of you guys have a kid one day, and sorry, I said that wrong. It's if you're born in the U.S., doesn't matter where your parents are from. You are going to be a United citizen. So if one day you guys have a kid and you're in the USA and you're not a U.S. citizen, uh, your son or daughter will become a U.S. citizen. That's what the 14th Amendment says. As long as you're born in the U.S., you will become a U.S. citizen regardless of where you're born. And the 15th Amendment said all men, regardless of color or ethnicity, are allowed to vote. So if you were a former slave and you're African American, a black person, and you were a citizen, you're allowed to vote. So that would have been good. Same thing if you're a Hispanic person from Texas, you're allowed to vote now. Before the 15th Amendment, you're only allowed to vote if you were white. That was it. But now all men can vote. Doesn't matter what color you are, what ethnicity you are. So I'm not going to go over all the details of this, but Lincoln, he was pretty easy on the Southerners. Johnson, he was harsh. And then there was the radical Republicans. And they're the ones who wanted to help blacks the most. So what you're going to do today is you're going to create your Reconstruction proposal, and essentially you're going to choose which plan do you think is the best. So you're going to have to choose one of these. You're going to tell me 2 reasons why you think it's the best, and then you need to explain the reason. So go to your Google Doc. There's more information there about what to do, and let me know if you have any questions. All right, thanks.